I, Vorruk-Shen, Chief Intelligence Analyst for the Galactic Dominion of the Kaelthari Empire, have documented wars spanning 47 star systems. I have watched civilizations crumble under the weight of our fleet's shadow. I have written reports on species so terrified of us that they surrendered before a single shot was fired. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the human. His name was Dax Ferrow. Just Dax, one word. No title, no rank designation, no planetary suffix. When our intake officer asked him to state his full identification upon capture, he simply said, Dax Ferrow. And whoever is in charge here is about to have a very bad week. Our intake officer, a seasoned veteran named Prethiul, who had processed 10,000 prisoners across 6 campaigns, just stared at him. Prethiul later filed an official report stating, and I am quoting directly here, subject appeared unbothered. This analyst recommends psychological evaluation. For myself, Dax Ferrow was a logistics coordinator, not a soldier, not a commander, not some genetically enhanced super soldier that the humans had supposedly developed in their outer colonies. He was a man whose entire job before we captured him was making sure that supply shipments arrived on time to frontier settlements. He managed spreadsheets. He argued with freight companies. He once, according to his own personnel file that we pulled from the human database, filed a 17-page complaint against a shipping contractor for delivering grain 3 days late. 17 pages. For grain. We should have released him right then and there. We should have recognized the warning signs. But no. We brought him aboard the Kaelthari Empire's flagship command vessel, the Dominion of Sorrow, because our Supreme Commander Varek-Doth had decided that capturing a human civilian would send a message to the human colonies on the frontier. The message Varek-Doth wanted to send was, "We are powerful, and you should fear us." The message we actually ended up sending was quite different. It started on the second day of Dax Ferrow's captivity. He asked to speak to whoever was in charge of food supply logistics on the ship. Not the commander, not the Admiral, the logistics coordinator, my assistant, a young analyst named Beltaurus, who was handling the monitoring feeds, came to me with an expression I had never seen on a Kaelthari face before. It was the expression of someone who had just watched something deeply confusing happen and was not sure whether to laugh or run. He says, Beltaurus told me, slowly, carefully, like someone delivering news they did not fully believe themselves, that our inventory rotation system is causing us to waste approximately 30% of our nutrient stores monthly. He says he noticed it from the meal they brought to his cell. The portion inconsistencies gave it away. I looked at Beltaurus. Beltaurus looked at me. He has been our prisoner for 22 hours, I said. Yes, sir. And in 22 hours he has identified a supply chain inefficiency that our logistics division has failed to catch for 3 years. Yes, sir. I went to see him myself. Cell Block 7, Section D. He was sitting on the floor not because there was no furniture. There was a perfectly functional sleeping platform, but apparently he found the floor more comfortable. He had torn a small strip from the edge of his clothing and was using it as a makeshift bookmark in a manual he had somehow convinced a guard to bring him. The manual was our ship's basic operations guide. Standard issue, given to new recruits, written in Kaelthari. He had been our prisoner for less than a day. He looked up when I entered, and he had the expression of a man who had been expecting company. You the guy in charge of inventory? He asked. I am the Chief Intelligence Analyst of the Kaelthari Empire, I told him. He nodded slowly, like this was acceptable but not quite what he was looking for. Right, okay. But do you know who handles the food rotation schedule? Because whoever set it up is rotating stock by acquisition date instead of expiration date, and you are losing a third of your perishables every cycle. That is a massive inefficiency. I sat down across from him. I am not sure why. I think my legs simply stopped working correctly for a moment. You are a prisoner, I reminded him. Yeah, I know, he said, not unkindly, but waste is waste. It bothers me. His name, I learned over the following 3 days, was the least interesting thing about him. Dax Ferrow was 41 years old by human reckoning. He had grown up on a mid-tier colony called Varada 5, which was not even officially on our charts as a significant settlement. He had studied supply chain management because, and again I am quoting him directly here, someone has to make sure things show up where they need to be and most people are terrible at it. He was not wrong about that. By day 3 he had also identified that our fuel consumption routing was running 17% above optimal, because someone had programmed our secondary engines to run simultaneous to our primary drives during cruising speed, which was apparently entirely unnecessary, and had been happening because a junior technician made a copy-paste error in the routing code 4 years ago, and nobody had caught it. Our chief engineer, Doth, came to me personally on day 4 with a look on his face that I can only describe as a man who has just been handed a present by someone who broke into his house. The human found the Varada drift miscalculation, Doth said. I know, I said. The one we have been trying to isolate for 2 years. I know. He found it in 6 hours. I know, Doth. While sitting in a cell, I am very aware. Doth stood there for another moment. Should we be concerned? The answer, it turned out, was yes. We absolutely should have been concerned. Not because Dax Ferrow was dangerous in any traditional sense. He had not attempted to escape. He had not tried to contact his people. He had not threatened anyone. He was by every measurable metric the most cooperative prisoner in the history of Kaelthari captivity. But the thing about Dax Ferrow was this. He could not turn off whatever it was in his brain that looked at systems and saw problems. On day 5 he asked to speak to whoever handled crew shift scheduling. On day 6 he submitted a 4-page handwritten report, in our language, using the grammar he had picked up from the operations manual, explaining why our water reclamation efficiency dropped 12% during third shift rotations. It was because the maintenance crews were scheduled during peak usage hours. The solution was moving one crew shift by 40 minutes. 40 minutes. 4 years of suboptimal water reclamation, fixed by 40 minutes and one human who had been awake for less than a week. Commander Varek-Doth called me to his command chamber on day 7. He was standing at the viewport, which was what he always did when he was trying to look thoughtful. Outside, the stars streaked slowly past, because we were still in transit toward the frontier. Tell me about the human, he said. I told him everything. Varek-Doth was quiet for a long time. He was a large creature, even by Kaelthari standards, with the heavy grey-plated shoulders of the northern continent casts and eyes that had seen enough war to stop looking surprised by most things. He had faced down the Tauran Armada. He had negotiated the collapse of the Seventh Frontier. Nothing rattled Varek-Doth. He turned to look at me with an expression I had never seen from him before. He fixed the water reclamation issue? Yes, sir. That issue was in the maintenance backlog for 4 years. Yes, sir. And the fuel routing error? Corrected and implemented. We are currently running at peak efficiency for the first time since the vessel's commission. Varek-Doth turned back to the viewport. What does he want? It was, honestly, the right question. In all my years of intelligence work, whenever someone does something unexpectedly helpful, you ask what they want. People do not help their captors out of the goodness of their hearts. They want something. They always want something. I had asked Dax Ferrow this question directly. On day 3, sitting across from him in that cell while he sketched out a revised inventory rotation chart on the back of a meal tray wrapper. He had looked up at me, genuinely puzzled, and said, I want things to work correctly. That is mostly it. Also, your sleeping platforms are too firm for human spinal alignment, and if you are planning to hold humans long-term, you should look into that. Not for my sake specifically, just, it is probably a health liability. I had returned to my office and sat in silence for approximately 40 minutes. He says he just wants things to work, I told Varek-Doth. The commander turned. That is not an answer. It is the only answer he gave, sir. My analysis suggests he is telling the truth. Another long silence. Move him out of the cell block, Varek-Doth said finally. Give him quarters. And, he paused here, like a man who knows he is making a decision he will think about for the rest of his life, give him access to the non-classified operational systems. I stared at him. Sir, you heard me, Vorruk-Shen. Sir, he is a prisoner. He is also the first individual in 4 years to fix the water reclamation system. At this point, Vorruk-Shen, I am less concerned about what he might do with access to our systems, and significantly more concerned about what problems he might find that we have been missing. I left the commander's chamber with the quiet, dawning feeling that something had shifted, something fundamental and probably irreversible. I walked through the corridor of the most powerful warship in the Kaelthari fleet, past weapons arrays that could level a continent, past crew members who had conquered star systems, and I thought about a 41-year-old human logistics coordinator who had been our prisoner for 1 week and had already made our flagship run better than it had at any point in its operational history. When I arrived at Dax Ferrow's cell to inform him of his upgraded accommodations, He was asleep on the floor with the operations manual open across his chest. I woke him. He opened his eyes, blinked twice, and said, "Did anyone check the calibration logs on the secondary navigation array? I was reading about it last night, and the recalibration intervals seem unusually short, which usually means something upstream is generating drift errors." I stood there in the doorway of his cell, on the flagship of the Kaelthari Empire, and I said, "We will look into it." He nodded, satisfied, and sat up. "Also," he added, "I have been thinking about your supply chain for the Frontier campaign. You are going to run into a resupply bottleneck at the Thresh 4 waypoint in about 3 weeks. The margins are too tight, and you are not accounting for the transit delay variance on the secondary convoy lines. Do you want me to walk someone through the numbers?" He said this like he was offering to help a neighbor carry groceries. He said this about our military campaign, the campaign that had taken 4 years to plan, the campaign designed to expand Kaelthari dominion over the human frontier. I opened my mouth and then closed it again. "Yes," I said after a moment. "Yes, Dax Ferrow. Someone will come to walk through the numbers with you." He smiled. It was a very normal, very calm, very human smile. It was somehow the most unsettling thing I had ever seen. I walked back to my office, and I wrote in my personal log, which I now keep locked behind 3 separate encryption layers, the following entry: Day 7 of Dax Ferrow's captivity. We captured him to send a message to the human colonies. I am beginning to suspect the message being sent is not the one Commander Varek-Doth intended. I am also beginning to suspect that this human, who manages spreadsheets and argues about grain deliveries, may be the single most quietly dangerous individual currently aboard this vessel. Not because he will hurt us, but because I am no longer entirely sure who is actually the prisoner here. End of log. The stars continued to streak past outside the viewport of the Dominion of Sorrow, carrying us toward the frontier, carrying us toward the human colonies we intended to intimidate into submission. And in a slightly too firm sleeping quarters on Deck 7, Dax Ferrow was almost certainly already finding something else that needed fixing. By the end of week 2, Dax Ferrow had been given a desk, not a prison desk, not a monitored workstation with restricted access, and a guard standing 3 feet away. An actual desk in a room adjacent to our operational logistics division, with a chair adjusted to human spinal requirements, because he had written a memo about it, and somehow, the memo had been acted upon. I want you to understand the magnitude of what I just said. I have submitted requests for updated analytical equipment through official Kaelthari Imperial channels. I submitted the first request 9 years ago. I am still waiting. Dax Ferrow wrote a 4-line note about his chair, and within 48 hours the maintenance crew had fabricated a custom seating unit based on his specifications. When I asked Chief Engineer Dothvel how this happened so fast, Dothvel looked at me with the exhausted expression of a man who had given up trying to explain water to someone who had never seen rain. He told Ensign Prover it would take him 20 minutes to fix, and would prevent 3 recurring back complaints from the human crew we might capture in future operations. He framed it as forward operational planning. "There are no other human crew members," I said. "I know that," Dothvel said. "Ensign Prover knows that." "Also yes. So why?" Dothvel shrugged in the Kaelthari fashion, which involves the shoulder plates lifting slightly and the lower jaw tightening. Because when he explains why something should be done, it is very hard to find a reason to say no. This was, I had come to realize, the central, defining, deeply exhausting truth about Dax Ferrow. He did not argue, he did not demand, he did not threaten. He simply explained, in clear and reasonable terms, why a thing made sense. And because the things he said always did make sense, people did them. It was not manipulation, it was not charm, it was something far more difficult to counter. It was just being right, consistently, at an almost aggressive frequency. The resupply bottleneck he had warned me about at the Thresh 4 waypoint. It materialized almost exactly when he said it would. We caught it in time, barely, because one of our logistics officers, a sharp young analyst named Fevkara, had listened to Dax's walkthrough and quietly restructured the convoy intervals. When Fevkara filed the corrective action report, she attributed the forecast to cross-departmental input from Asset Ferrow. Asset Ferrow. He was listed in our operational records as an asset now, not a prisoner. An asset. I went to see Commander Varek-Doth about this. The commander was, again, standing at the viewport. I was beginning to think he slept there. "Sir," I said, Dax Ferrow is listed in our system classification as an operational asset. Correct, said Varek-Doth. He was captured as an enemy civilian. Also correct. Those two classifications are not compatible. Varek-Doth turned to look at me. He had the particular expression of a commanding officer who knows that the thing they are doing is hard to justify, but has decided that justifying it is someone else's problem. Vorruk-Shen, he said, tell me something. In the past 14 days, what has the human done that has harmed this ship, this crew, or this campaign? I thought about it. I thought hard. I wanted to find something, not because I disliked Dax Ferrow, but because the absence of an answer was more alarming than any answer I could have given. Nothing, sir. And what has he done that has benefited this ship, this crew, and this campaign? I thought about the fuel routing, the water reclamation, the inventory rotation, the resupply bottleneck, the navigation array drift errors, which had, as he predicted, been traced back to a miscalibrated upstream sensor that had been causing minor but cumulative positional variance for over a year. I thought about the 17 separate written suggestions he had submitted through Fevkara's department, of which 14 had already been implemented, and the remaining 3 were under review. Quite a lot, sir. Sir, that is not the point. The point is the precedent. He is a human. We captured him as a demonstration of imperial authority. If we reclassify him as an asset and integrate him into our operations, what message does that send? Varek-Doth was quiet. Then he said, perhaps the message it sends is that we are practical. I returned to my office and updated my personal log. Day 14. The commander is becoming practical. This concerns me more than anything else that has happened so far. It was on day 17 that the situation became what I can only describe, in the most clinical and professional terms available to me, as completely out of control. Not violently, not dramatically. The way things with Dax Ferrow went out of control was quiet and incremental, and almost gentle, right up until the moment you looked up and realized the ground had shifted 30 degrees beneath your feet. It started with a meeting. Varek-Doth had called a senior staff assembly to review the Frontier campaign timeline. This was a classified briefing, command personnel only, the kind of meeting where the fate of settlements gets discussed in the dry, procedural language of military logistics. I was there. Dothvel was there. Fleet Admiral Varek-Doth was patched in via long-range relay from the secondary fleet, flickering slightly on the projection platform due to distance interference. Dax Ferrow was also there. Nobody quite remembered how that happened. Fevkara said she had assumed someone else had authorized it. The authorization officer said the clearance had been logged correctly. When I traced it back, the clearance request appeared to have been submitted by Dax Ferrow himself, through the standard request system, citing his status as an operational asset and referencing a Kaelthari administrative code that technically permitted asset-level personnel to attend operational reviews pertaining to their assigned functions. He had read that code in the operations manual, the one we gave him in his cell. On day 1, he had been planning to attend this meeting since day 1. I want to be very clear. He had not been planning anything sinister. When I confronted him about it afterward, he looked genuinely puzzled by my agitation. The resupply modeling I did is directly relevant to the campaign timeline, he said. It made sense to be in the room where the decisions are made. Otherwise you end up with people making choices based on incomplete data, and then 3 weeks later something breaks and everyone acts surprised. You are a prisoner, I said. He tilted his head. Am I? I opened my mouth. I closed it. Because I had checked that morning, I had gone through every classification, every log entry, every official record in the Kaelthari Imperial database pertaining to Dax Ferrow, and the honest answer to his question was, genuinely, unclear. He had entered our system as a captured civilian. He had been reclassified as an operational asset. He had been given quarters, a desk, system access, and now meeting attendance. At no point had anyone filed a formal prisoner status confirmation. Administratively speaking, I said very carefully, your status is ambiguous. He nodded like this was perfectly reasonable. Okay, then can we talk about the Frontier timeline? Because the campaign plan assumes an 18-day transit to the primary settlement cluster, but your nav array recalibration shifted your baseline speed calculations, and you are actually looking at 22 days now, which means your supply margins are already off, and we have not even left transit yet. Fleet Admiral Varek-Doth, flickering on the projection platform from 3-star systems away, said, he is correct. I ran the numbers myself this morning. I looked at Varek-Doth. Sora Khan looked back at me through approximately 40 trillion kilometers of signal relay. You ran the numbers, I said flatly. After his memo came through, yes, his memo. The one he sent to Operational Command yesterday. Did you not receive it? I had not received it. I checked my communications queue that evening and found that Dax Ferrow had, at some point in the previous 24 hours, obtained a communications access code, sent a logistics review memo directly to the Fleet Admiral of the Secondary Fleet, and had that memo read and acted upon before I, the Chief Intelligence Analyst, had been made aware it existed. My log entry that evening was 3 words long. What is happening? What was happening, I eventually came to understand, was this. Dax Ferrow was not a threat in any way we had been trained to recognize. He did not fight. He did not sabotage. He did not conspire or recruit or scheme in any dramatic fashion. He simply continued, with the calm and unstoppable momentum of a man who genuinely believes that the correct thing to do is fix what is broken and make things work better, to be useful. And in being useful, he had made himself indispensable, and in making himself indispensable, he had made himself effectively free. The campaign reached the outer frontier on day 23. The settlement cluster that was the target of Varek-Doth's demonstration of imperial authority appeared on our long-range scans as a collection of small, stubborn little habitats clinging to the edge of mapped space. The kind of places people go when they want to be left alone. The kind of places that remind you, if you are in the business of empire, that some people will always choose the edge over the center. Varek-Doth assembled the command staff. The plan was straightforward. We would enter sensor range. We would broadcast a standard Imperial Authority declaration. The settlement would see the dominion of sorrow and comply. Dax Ferrow was in the room. Of course he was. He listened to the full briefing without interrupting, which I had learned was not his default behavior and therefore meant he was thinking hard about something. When Varek-Doth finished outlining the operation, there was a silence, and in that silence Dax spoke. "Can I ask what you actually want from them?" he said. Varek-Doth looked at him. "Compliance. Right, but compliance with what specifically? What do you want them to do, or stop doing, or agree to?" Another silence. A longer one. Varek-Doth said, "They are operating within contested border space without Imperial authorization." "Okay," Dax said. "Do they know that? Because from what I can see in the territorial charts, the border designation in this sector was updated 14 months ago, and the update was filed under administrative code rather than public notice. So there is a real chance these people just do not know they are in violation, in which case flying a warship into their sensor range is going to terrify them and make them dig in, rather than, just telling them and asking them to register." Varek-Doth stared at him. "I have fought wars," Varek-Doth said. "I know," Dax said. "I have read your file. You are very good at it. I am just suggesting that this particular situation might not actually need a war." The room was so quiet I could hear the ventilation cycling. Dax reached into the pocket of his jacket, which was his original clothing that he had been wearing since capture and had somehow remained in relatively good condition, and produced a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it on the table. It was a draft communication, in standard interspecies diplomatic format, which he had apparently also found in the operations manual. It outlined the border designation, explained the administrative update that the settlers had likely missed, and offered a registration process by which the settlements could formalize their presence within Imperial adjacent space without conflict. It was polite, it was clear, it was reasonable. It would almost certainly work. Varek-Doth looked at the paper for a long time. "You wrote this," he said. "Last night," Dax confirmed. "Could not sleep. The sleeping platform is still a bit firm, but I did not want to file another memo about it." Sora Khan's voice came through the relay. "I think we should send it." Dothvel said, "I agree." Favkara, who was not technically senior staff but had somehow also ended up in the room, said nothing but nodded once, firmly. "Commander Varek-Doth, Supreme Military Authority of the Kaelthari Imperial Frontier Campaign, Conqueror of 7-star systems, victor of the Tauran Armada engagement, picked up the paper that a human logistics coordinator had written the previous night because he could not sleep, and he read it again slowly, from beginning to end. Then he looked at me. "Vorruk-Shen," he said, "what is the current official classification of Dax Ferrow in Imperial records?" I thought about it. "I believe, sir, that it is best described as complicated." Varek-Doth nodded. He set the paper down with the careful deliberateness of a man making a decision he knows will require significant paperwork. "Send the communication," he said, and someone please sort out his classification. The message was sent. The settlements responded within 6 hours, politely, curiously, with no small amount of confusion about why an Imperial warship had shown up to inform them about a paperwork issue, but without hostility. A registration process was agreed upon, no shots were fired, no settlements were threatened, no demonstration of Imperial authority was required, beyond the slightly embarrassing one of showing up and then essentially apologizing for the paperwork. I found Dax Ferrow in the small observation alcove off Deck 7, watching the settlement cluster on the external feed. He had a cup of something warm that Fevkara had apparently started providing him with regularly. I sat down. "You knew," I said, "from the start. You knew this is how it would end." He considered this. "I knew there was a version where it ended this way. I figured if I made myself useful enough, someone would listen when it mattered." "You fixed our ship," I said. "You corrected our campaign. You rewrote our foreign engagement to avoid a conflict. You did all of this while being our prisoner." "I was not really your prisoner after the first week," he said, in a tone so light and matter-of-fact it was almost insulting. "No," I agreed, "you were not." He sipped his warm drink. "So what happens now?" I asked. He shrugged. "I would like to go home eventually. Varada 5, check on my supply routes. There is a freight contractor there I have been arguing with about delivery windows, and I guarantee everything has gone sideways while I have been gone." He said this with the energy of a man looking forward to it. I sat with him for a while in silence, watching the stars and the small stubborn settlements at the edge of mapped space, the ones that would never know how close they had come to something terrible, and how far they had been carried from it by one ordinary man with an extraordinary inability to leave broken things alone. In my final official report on the Frontier Campaign, filed to Imperial High Command, I wrote the following summary. Campaign concluded without engagement. Territorial compliance achieved through administrative clarification, no casualties on either side, operational efficiency of the Dominion of Sorrow, improved by an average of 23% across all major systems. The human asset contributed significantly to all outcomes. Recommend immediate review of our prisoner classification protocols, our administrative communication practices, and our general assumption that military force is always the most efficient solution to a problem. High Command sent back one question. "Who is the human asset?" I wrote back, "A logistics coordinator, 41 years old, from a colony you have never heard of. He is very good at his job." They did not respond for 3 days. I imagine they were sitting very quietly, trying to figure out how a man who managed grain shipments had walked aboard the Empire's flagship as a prisoner and walked off as something entirely else. And if they ever figure it out, I hope they will tell me, because I was there for all of it, and I am still not entirely sure how he did it either. All I know is that somewhere on Varada 5 right now, Dax Ferrow is probably writing a 17-page complaint about a freight contractor, and that contractor, whoever they are, should be very, very worried.